When Sarah Mitchell walked into my office on that cold Tuesday morning in March, I had no idea I was about to uncover one of the most elaborate financial frauds I'd ever seen in a divorce case. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Her Chanel handbag, which I'd later learn was 3 years old and bought during better times, didn't match the dark circles under her eyes. Her hands trembled as she clutched a manila folder against her chest like it contained state secrets. What she showed me that day would lead to the discovery of hidden offshore accounts, shell companies, falsified tax returns, and a scheme so calculated that it had been running for nearly 5 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My husband wants a divorce, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then she looked directly into my eyes and added, "And I think he's been stealing from me for years. I've been practicing family law for 23 years. I've heard every excuse, every accusation, every desperate theory from clients who can't accept that their marriage is ending. 90% of the time, when a spouse says their partner is hiding money, they're wrong. They're hurt, they're angry, and they're looking for a villain in their story. But there was something about Sarah Mitchell that made me pay attention. Maybe it was the way she'd organized that folder with color-coded tabs and Post-it notes. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't cry, not once, during our entire first meeting. Or maybe it was what she said next. "I used to be a forensic accountant," Sarah said quietly, "before we had kids, before Michael convinced me to stay home. And I think my husband forgot that." Now she had my full attention. Sarah had been married to Michael Mitchell for 17 years. They had 2 children, Emma, 16, and Jack, 14. They lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in one of those neighborhoods where everyone's lawn looks perfect and nobody talks about money troubles. Michael owned an accounting firm, Mitchell and Associates, which he'd built from the ground up. Sarah had left her career as a forensic accountant at a Big 4 firm to raise their children, a decision she'd made willingly at the time. A typical story, really, except it wasn't. "It started about 2 years ago," Sarah explained, methodically opening her folder. "Small things at first. Michael started questioning every expense. He'd ask me why I spent $70 at the grocery store instead of $60. He'd want to know why I needed new running shoes when my old ones were perfectly fine. This is a man who never once looked at a receipt in 15 years of marriage." She pulled out a spiral notebook filled with handwritten entries, dates, amounts, observations. This wasn't the scattered documentation of a paranoid spouse. This was evidence collection by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Then he canceled our family vacation to Hawaii, said business was slow, we needed to be careful with money, but I just heard him on the phone the week before, closing a deal with some tech startup. He was celebrating. I heard him tell whoever he was talking to that it was a 6-figure contract. "Did you ask him about it?" I asked. "Of course." He said I'd misheard, that it was a potential contract, not a confirmed one, that I didn't understand business. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I used to audit Fortune 500 companies for fraud. I understand business." Sarah slid the first set of documents across my desk, bank statements from their joint checking account. I scanned them quickly, noting the pattern she'd already highlighted in yellow. Steady deposits from Michael's business, $7,000 every 2 weeks, like clockwork. After taxes, it matched up to that $180,000 annual income. "Looks normal," I said. "It does, doesn't it?" She pulled out another set of statements. "Now look at our expenses over the past 5 years. This is where it got interesting. 5 years ago, the Mitchells were spending freely, nice dinners out, regular shopping trips, summer camps for the kids, home improvement projects. Their credit card statements showed the lifestyle of a successful upper-middle-class family. But then, gradually, the spending decreased. Not dramatically, that would have been obvious. But inch by inch, month by month, their lifestyle had been contracting. The expensive family vacations became weekend trips. The weekly date nights became monthly. The home repairs that needed to be done kept getting postponed. He kept saying we needed to save more," Sarah continued. that we couldn't rely on the business always doing well, that we needed to be more responsible. And honestly, I believed him. I thought he was being smart, being cautious. What changed? I asked. His mother got sick, cancer. I went to visit her in the hospital, and she thanked me for the beautiful flowers we'd sent, except we hadn't sent any flowers. Michael said he'd handled it, spent about $300 on this elaborate arrangement. Sarah's hands tightened on the folder. I called the florist. There was no order, no delivery. I checked our credit cards, our bank accounts. No $300 charge to any florist. So where did that money go? She pulled out more documents. This time they were credit card statements, but certain charges were circled in red ink. I started really paying attention. Michael would mention expenses that never showed up on our accounts. A client dinner that cost $400, no charge. New tires for his car, no charge. A weekend business conference in Miami, no charge. He kept talking about all this money we were spending, but the money wasn't leaving our joint accounts. Maybe he had a business credit card, I suggested, playing devil's advocate. That's what I thought, so I looked up his business registration. Mitchell & Associates is an S Corp, which means business expenses can be deducted, but they still have to be reported. I found his business tax returns for the last 5 years. She pulled them out. I'd never seen someone so thoroughly prepared for a first consultation. His business has been claiming expenses of about $40,000 a year. Office rent, utilities, software, the usual stuff. But here's what's interesting. His claimed revenue has stayed almost exactly the same for 5 years, between $240,000 and $250,000 annually. After business expenses and his own salary, the business shows minimal profit, very tax efficient. Still seems normal, I said, though I was starting to see where she was going. Except his business has grown. A lot. I started watching, really watching. I counted at least 15 clients coming and going from his office on days when I drove by. I checked his LinkedIn. His firm now lists 8 major corporate clients. I looked up those companies. They're not small startups. These are established businesses that would be paying serious money for accounting services. Sarah pulled out a printed spreadsheet. This woman had created a full financial analysis. Conservative estimate: if Michael has 15 steady clients and 8 corporate accounts, his revenue should be somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 annually, maybe more. So where is that money going? And that's when I knew we had a real case. He's hiding it somewhere, Sarah said flatly, and I think he's been doing it for years. Because about 5 years ago, Michael did something strange. He went to a divorce attorney. She pulled out a credit card statement from 5 years prior. There it was, a $500 charge to Harrison & White, LLP, a well-known divorce firm in the city. I found this statement in a box in the garage last month. I confronted him about it. He said he'd gone for a consultation because we'd had a big fight, but then he decided not to go through with it, that he'd realized he wanted to make our marriage work. And you don't believe him? I think he decided that day that he wanted a divorce, and he started planning for it. I think he's been systematically hiding money ever since so that when he finally filed, I'd get as little as possible. Sarah Mitchell looked at me with absolute certainty in her eyes. I want you to find every penny, and I want you to make sure he regrets ever thinking I was just a stay-at-home mom who wouldn't notice. I took the case. The first thing I did was file a response to Michael's divorce petition and immediately subpoena his business records, all of them. Business bank statements, tax returns, client contracts, invoicing records, corporate filings, everything. Michael's attorney, Richard Dawson, fought me on every single request. He filed motions to quash the subpoenas. He argued that Michael's business records were confidential and not relevant to the divorce proceedings. He claimed that Sarah was on a fishing expedition and that I was harassing his client. Richard was known in the legal community as someone who played hardball. He'd been practicing for 30 years and had a reputation for being willing to do whatever it took to win. Some attorneys admired his tenacity, Others thought he crossed ethical lines. Our first real confrontation came during a motion hearing 2 weeks after I'd filed the subpoenas. Your Honor, Richard stood, his voice dripping with indignation. Opposing counsel is attempting to invade my client's business privacy without any reasonable basis. Mrs. Mitchell has made vague accusations with no supporting evidence. This is a transparent attempt to harass Mr. Mitchell and inflate legal fees. I remained seated, letting him finish his performance. Mr. Mitchell is a respected accountant in this community. He's built his business over 15 years through hard work and integrity. To have his business record subjected to this kind of scrutiny, based on nothing more than his wife's suspicions, is outrageous. Judge Morrison looked at me over her glasses. Counselor, your response? I stood slowly, picking up a single piece of paper. Your Honor, I have here a credit card statement from 5 years ago. It shows a $500 charge to Harrison & White, LLP, a well-known divorce firm. This charge appears exactly 2 months before Mr. Mitchell registered a business entity called MW Consulting Services in Delaware, a company that, according to our preliminary research, has no employees, no office, and lists Mr. Mitchell's accounting firm as its only client. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Mrs. Mitchell isn't making vague accusations. She's a former forensic accountant who worked for one of the Big Four firms. She spent 6 months documenting irregularities in the family finances. She's noticed that while Mr. Mitchell's business appears to be growing, with new corporate clients and expanded services, their family's standard of living has been steadily declining. I pulled out Sarah's notebook. She's documented instances where Mr. Mitchell claimed to have made significant business expenses that never appeared on their joint accounts. She's noted that his reported business income hasn't changed in 5 years, despite obvious growth. And she's identified a pattern of financial behavior that began almost immediately after Mr. Mitchell consulted with a divorce attorney. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Dawson, your client consulted with a divorce attorney 5 years ago? Richard shifted uncomfortably. A brief consultation, Your Honor. My client and his wife had a disagreement, and he wanted to understand his options, but he chose to work on the marriage. And 2 months later, he created a shell company. It's not a shell company, Your Honor. It's a legitimate business entity that has no employees, no office, and only one client. Judge Morrison's voice was sharp. That sounds like a shell company to me, Counselor. Your Honor, without seeing the full business records, we can't make that determination. Exactly my point, I interjected, which is why we need those records. Judge Morrison made her ruling quickly. The subpoenas are granted. Mr. Mitchell has 30 days to produce all business records, including those for MW Consulting Services. And Mr. Dawson, I don't want to see any more delays on this. If Mr. Mitchell has nothing to hide, he should have no problem producing these documents. As we left the courtroom, Richard pulled me aside in the hallway. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. My client is willing to be reasonable, but if you keep pushing this, it's going to get ugly. It's already ugly, Richard. Your client has been committing fraud for 5 years. The only question now is how much he's stolen. Be careful about throwing around accusations like that, Richard said, his voice low and threatening. Fraud is a serious allegation. If you can't prove it, you're going to look very foolish in front of Judge Morrison. I'm not worried, I replied, because I'm going to prove it. In my experience, innocent people don't fight this hard to keep their financial records private. Richard's aggressive defense strategy told me everything I needed to know. Sarah was right, but I didn't realize yet just how right she was. The boxes arrived at my office on a Friday afternoon. My paralegal, Jessica, called me from the reception area. Boss, you need to see this. I walked out to find our small reception area filled with boxes, 14 of them stacked haphazardly. This is from Mitchell's attorney, Jessica said, holding up the delivery receipt. All the business records you subpoenaed. It was a classic lawyer trick. When you can't fight the discovery request, you bury the opposing counsel in so much paper that it becomes impossible to find anything useful. 14 boxes of financial documents for a small accounting firm was absurd, unless you were trying to hide something. Get Sarah on the phone, I said. Tell her we need her expertise. Most of my clients would have been overwhelmed by this, but Sarah Mitchell wasn't most clients. She arrived within an hour, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked at the boxes and actually smiled. Classic obfuscation technique, she said. When I worked at the Big Four, we used to see this all the time from companies trying to hide fraud. They'd dump everything on us, receipts, invoices, memos, everything, hoping we'd drown in the irrelevant details and miss the important ones. So how do we handle it? We organize, we categorize, we build a timeline, and we look for patterns. She pulled out her laptop. I've already created a database template. We're going to enter every significant transaction from these boxes, categorize them, and let the data tell us the story. That could take weeks. It took Michael 5 years to build this fraud. We can spend 3 weeks unraveling it. Sarah was right. It took exactly 3 weeks. She worked in my conference room, surrounded by boxes and documents, her laptop open, multiple spreadsheets running. Sometimes I'd come in early in the morning and find her already there, coffee cup in hand, methodically working through another stack of papers. I asked her once why she was working so hard on this. Most clients would have let the lawyers handle it. Because he thought I wouldn't notice, she said simply. For 5 years, he thought I was too busy with the kids, too trusting, too unsophisticated to see what he was doing. Every transaction I enter into this database, every pattern I uncover, it's proof that he was wrong about me. She paused, staring at a particularly damning invoice. He underestimated me. That was his biggest mistake. The judge, thankfully, saw through it. Judge Patricia Morrison had been on the bench for 20 years and had zero patience for games. She ordered Michael to produce all business records within 30 days or face contempt charges. When the boxes arrived at my office, my paralegal counted them. 14 boxes of documents. It was a deliberate move. Bury us in paper, make it so overwhelming that we'd miss the important details. But Michael had made one critical mistake. He'd forgotten that his wife used to do this for a living. I hired Sarah as a consultant on her own case. Technically, she was helping her own attorney, me, analyze the financial documents. It wasn't unusual, and it meant she could dig through those boxes with the expertise of someone who'd spent a decade finding hidden money for a living. It took her 3 weeks. I'll never forget the day she called me. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was at my daughter's soccer game when my phone rang. I found it, Sarah said. Her voice was shaking, but not with fear, with anger. I found everything, and it's so much worse than I thought. We met at my office that evening. Sarah had created a presentation complete with flowcharts and highlighted documents. If this went to trial, her work would make my job incredibly easy. He created a shell company, she began, pulling up her first diagram. MW Consulting Services, registered in Delaware 5 years ago, 2 months after that divorce consultation charge. Delaware. Of course, it's where you register a company when you want privacy. The company has a business license, a federal tax ID, a bank account, and a website. The website is basic but professional, just professional enough that a cursory glance would make it seem legitimate. It lists generic consulting services, no employees, no office address, except a P.O. box. Let me guess, I said. Michael's firm is a client. Not just a client, the only client. Here's how it works. Sarah pulled up invoices from Michael's accounting firm. Clean, professional, exactly what you'd expect. Michael's firm bills clients at market rate. Let's say a small business needs quarterly financial statements and tax preparation. Michael bills them $10,000. Standard rate, totally normal. The client pays, happy with the service. She pulled up another set of documents. But then Michael's firm immediately turns around and subcontracts a portion of that work to MW Consulting Services. According to these records, MW Consulting handles specialized tax analysis and financial modeling. Michael's firm pays MW Consulting $7,000 for these specialized services. Services that MW Consulting never actually provides, I said. Exactly. MW Consulting does nothing. It's just a bank account. The money goes in, and then Michael moves it somewhere else. His accounting firm reports only the $3,000 difference as income. So on paper, Michael's firm makes $3,000 from that $10,000 job. Very modest, very tax efficient. But the real profit is the $7,000 going to MW Consulting, which Michael owns, controls, and has never told me about. Sarah pulled up bank statements from MW Consulting. She'd subpoenaed them through the business records request, and Michael's attorney had been forced to turn them over. He's been doing this for 5 years, not on every client, that would be too obvious, but on enough of them. Look at the deposits. I scanned the statements, dozens of transactions, most between $3,000 and $15,000, some larger, $25,000, $40,000, even one for $75,000. How much total, I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. $2.1 million, Sarah said. Over 5 years, he's funneled $2.1 million through this shell company. I sat back in my chair. This was fraud. Clear, deliberate, calculated fraud. But wait, Sarah said, a grim smile on her face. There's more. She pulled up tax returns. Michael's been overpaying his taxes, deliberately. His accounting firm withholds extra federal and state taxes every quarter, way more than necessary. We're talking about $40,000 to $50,000 per year in excess withholding. Why would he do that? Because at the end of the year, he gets a big refund, and those refund checks don't go to our joint account. Look. She showed me copies of tax refund checks for the past 5 years. Each one made out to Michael Mitchell personally, deposited to, you guessed it, an account I'd never seen before. He's been getting $40,000 to $50,000 back every year from the IRS and state tax authorities. Money that should have been in our joint account helping pay our bills. Instead, it's going into account number 4782 at First National Bank. How much in that account? Another $275,000. I did the math. The shell company plus the tax refund account, we were at $2.375 million. Still more, Sarah said. She was on a roll now, and I could see the forensic accountant she used to be. Michael's firm has a retirement account, SEP IRA for self-employed individuals. According to his financial disclosure in the divorce filing, he has $180,000 in that account. Seems reasonable for someone who's been self-employed for 15 years. But I found quarterly statements. Michael's been contributing the maximum allowed amount to this account, not based on his reported income of $180,000, but based on a much higher number. The IRS allows you to contribute up to 25% of compensation to a CP IRA. Michael's been contributing $50,000 to $60,000 per year. That's way more than 25% of $180,000. Exactly, which means his real compensation is much higher. And there's something else. She pulled out brokerage statements. 6 months ago, Michael rolled over $150,000 from his SEP IRA to a self-directed IRA. That account is now invested in a Cayman Islands fund. Cayman Islands, the gift that keeps on giving for forensic investigators. I can't get full records on that without international subpoenas, but based on the rollover documentation, there's at least $400,000 in offshore investments. I was writing numbers on a legal pad. So we have $2.1 million in the shell company account, $275,000 in the tax refund account, and let's say conservatively $400,000 in offshore investments. That's $2.775 million, plus the legitimate business value of Mitchell & Associates, plus his disclosed retirement accounts, plus our joint assets, Sarah added. The marital estate is probably worth close to $4 million total. And Michael was planning to divorce you based on an income of $180,000 per year. which would have meant minimal alimony and child support. He probably thought he'd get away with maybe $3,000 a month total. Meanwhile, he'd have millions hidden away that I'd never see. Sarah looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, her composure cracked slightly. We've been struggling. I've been buying generic brands at the grocery store. I've been cutting coupons. Our daughter wanted to go on the school trip to Washington, D.C., and Michael said we couldn't afford the $800. I watched my 16-year-old daughter cry because she thought we were poor. Her voice hardened. He has $2.7 million hidden, and he made our daughter think we couldn't afford an $800 school trip. I knew in that moment that we weren't just going to win this case. We were going to destroy him. The emergency motion for a freeze of all assets was filed on a Monday morning. I included every piece of evidence Sarah had compiled: bank statements, wire transfers, tax returns, the shell company registration, the offshore account documentation, all of it. I also included something else, a declaration from Sarah describing how Michael's financial manipulation had affected their children, how Emma had cried about not being able to afford the school trip, how Jack had started lying to his friends about why they couldn't go on vacation anymore, how both kids had developed anxiety about money because their father kept telling them they were barely getting by. Michael's attorney called me before noon, and I could hear the panic in Richard's voice. "This is outrageous," he spluttered. "You're making wild accusations based on circumstantial evidence. MW Consulting is a legitimate business entity. The offshore accounts are legal investments. There's no fraud here." "Then your client won't mind explaining it all to Judge Morrison under oath," I replied calmly. "I've requested an emergency hearing for Wednesday morning." "Wednesday? That's impossible. We need time to prepare a response. We need to consult with experts. We need to—" "Your client has had 5 years to prepare. He should be ready." There was a long pause on the line. "Look," Richard said, his voice changing from aggressive to conciliatory, "let's be reasonable here. My client is willing to discuss a settlement. Maybe we can work something out without all this drama." "What's he offering?" "A standard 50-50 split of marital assets, fair child support, reasonable alimony. We can have this wrapped up in a month." "Based on his reported income of $180,000? "Based on his actual business income, yes." "Richard, we both know his actual income is at least double that, probably triple, and that's not even counting the $2.1 million he's hidden in MW Consulting." Another pause. "I'm not confirming those numbers." "You don't have to. The documents speak for themselves. The hearing is Wednesday at 9 a.m. I suggest your client spends the next 2 days figuring out how he's going to explain this to a judge." I hung up. The hearing was set for 9 o'clock a.m. on Wednesday. I spent Tuesday evening preparing with Sarah, going over every document, every timeline, every transaction. She knew this case better than I did. It was her life, after all. But I needed to be able to present it in a way that would make Judge Morrison see exactly what Michael had done. "Are you nervous?" I asked Sarah as we wrapped up our prep session. "No," she said, and she meant it. "I've been waiting for this moment for 2 years, ever since I started suspecting something was wrong. I'm ready." The courthouse was packed Wednesday morning. Word had gotten out in the local legal community that this was going to be an interesting hearing, and several attorneys I knew had shown up just to watch. Michael arrived in an expensive suit, Brooks Brothers, I noted, which seemed ironic given his claims of financial hardship. He was accompanied by Richard and another attorney I didn't recognize, probably a corporate lawyer to help explain the business structures. Sarah sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her posture perfect, her expression calm. She dressed conservatively but professionally, a navy suit that made her look like the forensic accountant she used to be. Michael wouldn't look at her, but she stared straight at him, unflinching, for the entire time we waited for the judge. Judge Morrison entered at exactly 9 o'clock a.m., and we all stood. She settled into her chair, adjusted her reading glasses, and opened the thick file in front of her. "Well," she said dryly, "I stayed up late last night reading this motion and the supporting documentation, quite the page-turner. Mr. Dawson, your client appears to have some explaining to do. Richard stood. Your Honor, I want to start by saying that this motion is based on a gross mischaracterization of legitimate business practices. My client runs a successful accounting firm. It's not unusual for such firms to use subsidiary companies for specialized services. It's not unusual for business owners to have multiple accounts for different purposes. And it's certainly not unusual for divorcing spouses to make accusations about hidden money. Noted, Judge Morrison said. Now explain M.W. Consulting Services. Richard glanced at Michael, who nodded slightly. M.W. Consulting provides specialized tax consulting services that Mr. Mitchell's firm subcontracts for certain complex client matters. Does M.W. Consulting have any employees? Judge Morrison asked. No, Your Honor. Mr. Mitchell contracts with independent consultants as needed. How many independent consultants have you contracted with over the past 5 years, Mr. Mitchell? Judge Morrison had turned her attention directly to Michael. In all my years practicing before her, I'd learned that this was a dangerous moment for any witness. She had a way of asking simple questions that became traps. Michael cleared his throat. I don't have that exact number with me, Your Honor. Ballpark? 10 consultants? 20, 50? I'd need to review my records to give you an accurate number. Mr. Mitchell, you're an accountant. Surely you have some idea how many consultants you've paid over 5 years. More silence. Judge Morrison looked at me. Counsel? I stood. Your Honor, we've subpoenaed M.W. Consulting's bank records. Over the past 5 years, there have been 0 payments to any consultants, 0 payments to any employees, 0 payments to any vendors. The only transactions are deposits from Mitchell & Associates and transfers out to other accounts controlled by Mr. Mitchell. The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Morrison turned back to Michael. So M.W. Consulting has no employees, no contractors, no office, and no actual business activities. But it's received $2.1 million from your accounting firm over 5 years. Is that correct? Those were legitimate business expenses, Your Honor, Michael said, his voice strained. For what services? Specialized tax analysis, financial modeling, strategic consulting on complex matters. And who performed these services? Independent contractors. That you can't name and never paid? Michael's face was flushed now. I could see sweat on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the courtroom. Your Honor, I resent the implication that I've done anything improper. I'm a licensed CPA with an impeccable reputation. I've been serving clients in this community for 15 years. The suggestion that I would commit fraud is insulting and defamatory. Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair. Mr. Mitchell, I haven't suggested anything. I'm simply asking you to explain your business practices. But since you've brought up the topic of fraud, let's discuss it. She flipped through the documents in front of her. Your firm has been reporting gross revenue of approximately $240,000 per year for the past 5 years. After expenses and your salary, the firm shows minimal profit, very tax efficient, as Mrs. Mitchell noted in her declaration. That's correct, Your Honor. And yet, according to the evidence presented, your firm has at least 23 active clients, including 8 corporate accounts. How is it possible that you're only generating $240,000 in revenue with that many clients? Some clients are smaller accounts, Your Honor. Not every client generates significant revenue. Judge Morrison pulled out a document. I have here a contract between your firm and Innovatech Solutions, dated 2 years ago. This contract is for quarterly financial statements, tax preparation, and advisory services. The contract value is $48,000 annually. She looked up at Michael. That's just one client, Mr. Mitchell, just one, and it's worth $48,000. Yet you're claiming your entire practice only generates $240,000. Richard jumped to his feet. Your Honor, individual client contracts don't necessarily reflect actual revenue, There could be discounts, adjustments, modifications. Then where's the documentation showing these discounts and adjustments? Silence. Judge Morrison continued. Let's talk about MW Consulting again. According to the invoices, your firm has been billing clients at market rate. Let's use the Innovatech example, $48,000 per year. But then your firm turns around and subcontracts a significant portion of that work, usually 60 to 70% to MW Consulting. So out of that $48,000, your firm pays MW Consulting about $30,000 for specialized services and reports only $18,000 as income. She leaned forward. Mr. Mitchell, you're an accountant. You know what this looks like. This is a classic income skimming scheme. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Richard was on his feet again. Your Honor, these are serious allegations being made without proper foundation. We haven't had time to properly respond to. Mr. Dawson, your client has had 5 years. Sit down. Judge Morrison turned to Michael again. Here's what I see, Mr. Mitchell. I see a man who consulted with a divorce attorney 5 years ago. 2 months later, that man created a shell company. For the next 5 years, that man systematically funneled money from his legitimate business into that shell company, reducing his reported income and building up hidden assets, all while telling his wife and children that money was tight, all while making his teenage daughter cry because she couldn't go on an $800 school trip. She paused, letting that sink in. And now, when his wife discovers what he's been doing, he claims it's all legitimate business practices. Do I have that right? Michael's voice was barely audible. Your Honor, I'm freezing all accounts, Judge Morrison said, her voice like steel. Mitchell and Associates, MW Consulting Services, all personal accounts in Mr. Mitchell's name, all joint accounts, all retirement accounts, all offshore accounts, everything. She looked at Richard. I'm ordering a complete forensic accounting of every business entity your client owns or controls. I'm appointing Margaret Chen as the forensic accountant. I've worked with her before, and she's excellent. Mr. Mitchell will cooperate fully with her investigation, or he will be held in contempt. Judge Morrison picked up her gavel. And Mr. Mitchell, if Ms. Chen finds that you've moved, hidden, or disposed of any assets since Mrs. Mitchell's attorney filed this motion, I will hold you in contempt of court. And I promise you, you won't like what happens next. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Michael whispered. We're adjourned. I want Ms. Chen's full report on my desk in 90 days. The bang of the gavel echoed through the courtroom. As everyone started to leave, I saw something that struck me. Emma and Jack, Sarah's children, were sitting in the back of the courtroom. I hadn't known they were there. Sarah hadn't mentioned bringing them. Emma was 16, tall and serious looking, wearing her school uniform. Jack was 14, smaller, with his father's eyes but his mother's determined expression. As Michael walked past them to leave, Emma stood up. Dad, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Michael stopped, turned, his face showing something between hope and fear. That school trip to Washington, D.C., the one you said we couldn't afford? My friend's mom paid for it. She felt sorry for me because I told her we were too poor. I was so embarrassed. Emma's voice was shaking, but she kept going. The whole time we were there, I kept thinking about how you'd made me beg you for that $800, how you'd made me feel like asking for it was selfish. And now I find out you had millions of dollars hidden, that you were stealing from Mom while telling us we needed to eat generic cereal to save money. Tears were streaming down her face now. I'm so ashamed that you're my father. Michael opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Sarah as if expecting her to intervene, but Sarah just looked back at him with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger, not satisfaction, just finality. Jack stood up next to his sister, took her hand, and they walked out together, leaving Michael standing alone in the aisle. It was the most devastating moment I'd ever witnessed in a courtroom, and not a single word of testimony had been spoken. I spent that evening preparing with Sarah, going over every document, every timeline, every transaction. She knew this case better than I did. It was her life, after all. But I needed to be able to present it in a way that would make Judge Morrison see exactly what Michael had done. The courthouse was cold the next morning. Michael arrived in an expensive suit, Brooks Brothers, I noted, which seemed ironic given his claims of financial hardship. He wouldn't look at Sarah. She stared straight at him the entire time we waited for the judge. Judge Morrison entered, and we all stood. She was in her late 50s with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and reading glasses that made her look like someone's kindly grandmother. But I'd seen her eviscerate attorneys who wasted her time. "Counsel," she said, settling into her chair, "I've read the motion and the supporting documentation. Mr. Dawson, your client appears to have some explaining to do." Richard stood. "Your Honor, this is a gross mischaracterization of legitimate business practices. My client runs a successful accounting firm. It's not unusual for such firms to use subsidiary companies for specialized services." "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Morrison said, turning to Michael directly, "this MW Consulting Services, does it have any employees?" Michael cleared his throat. "No, Your Honor. I contract with independent consultants as needed." "And how many independent consultants have you contracted with over the past 5 years?" Silence. "Mr. Mitchell?" "I don't have that number with me, Your Honor." "Ballpark." More silence. "Your Honor," I stood up, "we've subpoenaed MW Consulting's records. There are no payments to any consultants, no payments to anyone except transfers out to other accounts owned by Mr. Mitchell." Judge Morrison looked at Michael over her glasses. "So MW Consulting has no employees, no contractors, no office, and no actual business activities. But it's received $2.1 million from your accounting firm over 5 years? Those were legitimate business expenses, Your Honor. For what services?" Michael looked at his attorney. Richard stood again. "Your Honor, we'd need more time to compile that information." "You've had 5 years, Judge Morrison said dryly. "Let's move on. Mr. Mitchell, you've been reporting annual income of approximately $180,000 to the court in your financial disclosure, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you've been claiming financial hardship, unable to afford family vacations, questioning grocery expenses, telling your daughter you couldn't afford an $800 school trip." "We've been trying to save money, Your Honor." "While depositing over $2 million into secret accounts?" The courtroom was silent. "Your Honor," Richard tried again, "there's no evidence that my client had any fraudulent intent. These are legitimate business structures that—" "Counsel!" Judge Morrison's voice cut through the air like ice. "I've been on this bench for 20 years. I know what legitimate business structures look like, and I know what fraud looks like. This is fraud." She turned to Michael. "Mr. Mitchell, you're an accountant. You help other people manage their money legally and ethically. And yet you've spent 5 years creating shell companies, hiding income from your wife, manipulating tax returns, and moving money offshore, all while making your family live like you were barely scraping by." Michael's face had gone pale. "I'm freezing all accounts, including MW Consulting Services and all offshore investments. I'm ordering a full forensic accounting of every business entity you own or control. And Mr. Mitchell, if I find out you've moved, hidden, or disposed of any assets since your wife's attorney filed this motion, I will hold you in contempt of court. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Michael whispered. "We're adjourned. I want a full accounting on my desk in 90 days. As we left the courtroom, I saw Michael and his attorney huddled in a corner, arguing in harsh whispers. Sarah walked past them without a glance. The next 90 days were unlike anything I'd experienced in my career. Margaret Chen dove into Michael's finances with the precision of a surgeon and the determination of a detective. Sarah worked alongside her, providing context and insights that only a former spouse would know. What they found was staggering. Margaret called me 3 weeks into her investigation, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I've been doing this for 25 years, she said. "I've uncovered embezzlement, money laundering, tax fraud, but this is one of the most cold-blooded things I've ever seen." "What did you find?" "Meet me at your office. You need to see this." An hour later, Margaret spread documents across my conference table. Sarah was there too, her face pale as she looked at what Margaret had discovered. "The offshore accounts are worse than we thought," Margaret began. "Michael didn't just move $400,000 offshore. He moved $680,000. But here's the really clever part. He did it through 3 different channels over the course of 4 years, keeping each transaction under $100,000 to avoid triggering certain reporting requirements." She pulled up a flow chart on her laptop. Money flows from Mitchell & Associates to MW Consulting. From MW Consulting, it gets split 3 ways. Some goes to his secret domestic account. Some goes to what he claimed was a business investment fund. And some goes offshore through a series of intermediary accounts, almost impossible to trace unless you know what you're looking for. "How did you find it?" I asked. "Michael made one mistake. He's meticulous about most things, but he used the same IP address to access all his accounts. I subpoenaed his internet service provider records and matched the login times. Same person accessing multiple accounts he claims to know nothing about." Margaret pulled out another stack of documents. "But that's not even the worst part. Michael has been systematically underreporting his business income for 5 years. Not massively, that would trigger an audit, but 15-20% every year. Look at these client invoices versus what he reported on his taxes." She showed us side-by-side comparisons. A client invoice for $50,000, tax return showing $41,000 in revenue from that client. A client invoice for $30,000, tax return showing $24,000. He's been skimming off the top before the money even hits his books. Over 5 years, that's approximately $380,000 in unreported income. "Jesus," I muttered. "Wait, there's more." Margaret pulled out bank statements. "Michael transferred $100,000 to his brother James 3 years ago. The documentation calls it a loan. But there's no promissory note, no repayment schedule, no interest rate, nothing that would make this look like a legitimate loan." "He gave his brother money to hold," Sarah said quietly. "James lives in Arizona. Michael probably thought I'd never find out." "We subpoenaed James's bank records," Margaret continued. "That $100,000 is sitting in a brokerage account in his name. But guess who has online access to that account? Michael." Margaret pulled up one more set of documents, the most damning of all. "And then there are these 3 additional shell companies: TRW Holdings, Cascade Advisory, and Summit Financial Group. All registered in Delaware within 6 months of MW Consulting. All have minimal activity, just enough to look legitimate. But together they've received about $200,000 from various sources over the past 5 years. "Various sources?" I asked. "That's the interesting part. These companies aren't just receiving money from Mitchell & Associates, they're receiving money from some of his clients directly." Sarah looked up sharply. "What?" "Michael's been recommending that certain clients set up accounts with these shell companies for specialized services. The clients think they're paying legitimate vendors, but they're actually paying Michael's secret companies. The clients have no idea they're being defrauded." "That's not just divorce fraud," I said slowly. "That's criminal fraud," Margaret finished, "against his clients. I'm going to have to report this to the state bar and possibly the IRS." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, her back to us. I could see her shoulders shaking. "Sarah?" I asked gently. "I've been married to a criminal," she said, her voice breaking. "For 17 years, I've been married to a man who was stealing from his clients, people who trusted him, people who came to him for help with their finances, and he was robbing them." She turned around, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen before. Not just anger or hurt, disgust. What kind of person does this? What kind of person looks his wife and children in the eye every day while running schemes like this? I didn't have an answer for her, but the investigation wasn't done. 2 weeks later, Margaret discovered something that would blow the case wide open. "Michael has a girlfriend," Margaret said when she called me. "Her name is Jennifer Hartley. She owns 3 boutique fitness studios in the area. And guess who does her accounting?" "Michael," I said. "Exactly. And guess whose business taxes have been creatively managed?" Margaret sent over copies of Jennifer's business tax returns for the past 3 years. They were a mess of inflated expenses, questionable deductions, and classifications that no legitimate accountant would approve. "If the IRS ever audits her, she's going to be in serious trouble," Margaret said. "She could be looking at penalties in the 6 figures. Does she know?" "I don't think so. I think Michael convinced her these were all standard practices. She trusted him completely." "We need to depose her," I said. The deposition of Jennifer Hartley was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. She arrived looking confused and slightly defensive, dressed in expensive athletic wear that probably came from her own studios. "I don't understand why I'm here," she said as we got started. "Michael and I are dating, yes, but I don't know anything about his divorce." "Ms. Hartley," I began, "how long have you been in a relationship with Michael Mitchell?" "About 18 months. And he does the accounting for your businesses?" "Yes, he's been wonderful. Really helped me streamline my operations." "I'm going to show you a series of documents. These are your business tax returns for the past 3 years. I slid them across the table. Jennifer glanced at them. "Okay. Do you see this deduction here for $47,000 in consulting services?" "Yes, Michael said we should deduct that." "Who provided these consulting services?" "I'm not sure. Michael handled all of that, some business consultant he knew." I pulled out another document. The payment went to TRW Holdings, a company owned by Michael. Jennifer's face went pale. "What?" "Michael billed your company $47,000 for consulting services that were never provided. He paid himself through a shell company." "That can't be right. Michael wouldn't." "And this deduction, $22,000 for equipment repairs. Do you remember having $22,000 worth of equipment repairs?" I don't think so, but Michael said that payment also went to one of Michael's shell companies, Cascade Advisory. I kept going, document after document, showing Jennifer how Michael had been inflating her business expenses and funneling the money to himself. By the time we were done, she'd realized that over 3 years, Michael had stolen approximately $180,000 from her businesses. And worse, he'd done it in a way that made it look like legitimate business expenses. When the IRS eventually audited her, and they would once this case became public, she'd be the one held responsible. Jennifer started crying halfway through the deposition. "I trusted him," she sobbed. "I loved him. He told me he was helping me save money on taxes. He said every small business did this." "They don't," Margaret said gently. "I'm sorry." By the time we finished, Jennifer had agreed to provide a full written statement detailing Michael's fraudulent accounting practices. She'd also agreed to cooperate with any criminal investigations. And she'd broken up with him. She called Michael right there in the conference room, put it on speaker so we could hear for legal purposes. "You're a thief and a liar," she told him, her voice shaking with fury. "You've been stealing from me this whole time. You've put my business at risk. You could have gotten me sent to jail. We're done. And I'm getting a new accountant to file amended returns. I never want to see you again." She hung up before he could respond. "I hope you take him for everything he's got," Jennifer told Sarah before she left. "I hope he ends up living in a cardboard box." The case was starting to take on a life of its own. Word had spread through the local business community about what Michael had been doing. Several of his clients quietly started looking for new accountants. Some reached out to us, concerned they might have been victims too. The state bar opened an ethics investigation. The IRS opened an audit, not just of Michael's returns, but of several of his clients' returns as well. Michael's attorney called me on a Friday afternoon, about 4 months into the case. "We need to talk about settlement," Richard said. His voice was strained, exhausted. I could tell he'd been dealing with a difficult client. "I'm listening." "My client is prepared to offer a 50-50 split of all marital assets, including the discovered accounts." "That's a start." He'll agree to child support based on his actual income, not the reported income. Still listening. And he'll agree to pay spousal support of $6,000 per month for 10 years. I did the math quickly. With a 50-50 split of roughly $3.2 million in discovered assets, plus half the house value, plus his retirement accounts, Sarah would be getting approximately $2 million in total, plus $6,000 a month for 10 years, $720,000, plus child support until both kids turned 18. It was a substantial offer. Many attorneys would have advised their client to take it. I wasn't most attorneys. Not enough, I said. Excuse me? Your client committed fraud against his wife, against his children, against his clients. He lied to the court. He manipulated tax returns. He created multiple shell companies. He moved money offshore. He enlisted his brother in his schemes. And you think a standard 50-50 split is appropriate? What are you asking for? 65-35 split in Sarah's favor. Spousal support of $8,000 per month for 15 years. Child support based on his true income of at least $400,000 per year, not $180,000. The house goes entirely to Sarah. Michael can buy her out of his share from his portion of assets. And Michael pays all of Sarah's legal fees and forensic accounting costs, which are currently around $180,000. There was a long silence on the line. That's unreasonable. You're asking for more than 60% of the marital estate. No, Richard. What's unreasonable is your client's behavior for the past 5 years. Take it or leave it. If we go to trial, I'm going to bring up the perjury. I'm going to call Jennifer as a witness to testify about how Michael defrauded her. I'm going to have Margaret Chen explain to a jury exactly how sophisticated this fraud was. I'm going to put Emma on the stand to testify about how her father made her beg for $800 while sitting on millions. And I'm going to ask Judge Morrison for sanctions, penalties, and punitive damages on top of everything else. I could hear Richard breathing heavily on the other end of the line. Let me talk to my client, he finally said. You have 72 hours, I told him. After that, we're preparing for trial, and the offer goes to 70-30. Richard called back in 60 hours. He'll agree to your terms, Richard said quietly. All of them. Smart choice. He has one request. I'm listening. He wants to talk to his kids. Before the settlement is finalized, he wants a chance to explain. That's not up to me. That's up to Sarah and the kids. Will you ask? I promised I would, though I knew what the answer would be. The final settlement gave Sarah $2.4 million in cash and assets, 65% of the marital estate. The family home worth $650,000 with no mortgage. Spousal support of $8,000 per month for 15 years, $1.44 million total. Child support of $3,500 per month until both children turned 18. Michael was required to maintain life insurance policies naming Sarah and the children as beneficiaries. Michael had to pay $180,000 in Sarah's legal fees and forensic accounting costs, total value over $4.5 million. If Michael had been honest from the start, he probably would have ended up with more. A standard divorce with his real income would have given him at least $2 million in assets and much lower support obligations. His attempt to defraud Sarah had cost him an extra $1 million, his reputation, much of his client base, and his relationship with his children, because that was the real tragedy of this case. Emma, their 16-year-old daughter, had been taking AP economics. She understood what her father had done. She understood that he'd lied, stolen, and manipulated for years. She understood that he'd made her cry about an $800 school trip while sitting on millions of hidden dollars. She stopped talking to Michael entirely, changed her last name to her mother's maiden name, refused to go to his apartment for custody time. Jack, their son, was 14 and didn't fully understand the financial details, but he understood that his father had hurt his mother. He understood that his father had lied to everyone. He went to therapy, struggling with anger and trust issues. Michael tried to repair the relationships. He sent gifts. He wrote letters. He showed up at Emma's volleyball games, sitting alone in the stands while Sarah sat with the other parents. But damage like that doesn't heal quickly. Maybe it doesn't heal at all. I met with Sarah and the kids that evening to discuss Michael's request. We sat in my office, Emma and Jack on the couch, Sarah in a chair, all of them looking exhausted from months of emotional turmoil. Your father wants to meet with you both before we finalize the settlement, I explained. He wants a chance to explain his side of things. Emma's response was immediate. No. Emma, Sarah started. No, Mom, what is there to explain? That he stole from you? That he stole from his clients? That he lied to everyone for years? That he made us think we were poor while he had millions hidden? What explanation could possibly make that okay? Jack was quieter, but he nodded in agreement with his sister. I don't want to hear him make excuses, Jack said. He's already tried. He sent me like 10 texts saying it was all complicated business stuff that I wouldn't understand, like I'm stupid. You're not stupid, Sarah said firmly. Neither of you are, and you don't have to see him if you don't want to. I do want to say something to him, though, Emma said. She pulled out her phone. Can I send him one text, just one? What do you want to say? I asked. Emma showed me her phone. The message read, You taught me what kind of person I never want to become. That's the only valuable thing you've ever given me. Can I send it? She asked. Yes, Sarah said before I could respond. Send it. Emma hit send, then turned off her phone and put it in her pocket. Now, can we finish this? She asked. I want it to be over. The final settlement gave Sarah $2.4 million in cash and assets, 65% of the marital estate, the family home worth $650,000 with no mortgage, spousal support of $8,000 per month for 15 years, $1.44 million total, child support of $3,500 per month until both children turned 18. Michael was required to maintain life insurance policies with $3 million in coverage, naming Sarah and the children as beneficiaries. Michael had to pay $180,000 in Sarah's legal fees and forensic accounting costs. Michael was required to pay for both children's college education, including room, board, and expenses, at any accredited university, total value over $4.5 million. The settlement also included some unusual clauses that Sarah insisted on. Michael was prohibited from contacting the children except through a court-approved app, and only if the children initiated contact. Michael had to write a letter to each of his former clients who had been affected by his fraud, explaining what he'd done and apologizing. Michael had to undergo a forensic accounting audit every year for the next 5 years, with results provided to Sarah. If Michael was ever found to have hidden any additional assets, the entire settlement would be void and Sarah would be entitled to 100% of everything. The judge approved the settlement at a final hearing 2 weeks later. Michael sat at the defendant's table, looking 20 years older than he had at the start of the case. He'd lost weight. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. He didn't look at anyone as the judge went through the terms. Mr. Mitchell, Judge Morrison said at the end, I've been on this bench for 20 years. I've seen a lot of bad behavior in divorce cases, but what you did goes beyond bad behavior. You didn't just lie to your wife. You lied to your children. You lied to the court. You committed fraud against people who trusted you. She paused. You're an accountant. You help people manage the most important financial decisions of their lives, and you betrayed that trust for personal gain. I want you to know that I've referred this case to the State Bar for Ethics Review and to the IRS for criminal investigation. You may be facing consequences beyond this divorce. Michael nodded, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. I hope it was worth it, Judge Morrison said. Divorce granted. The bang of the gavel had a finality to it that seemed to echo through the courtroom. As we gathered our things to leave, Michael's attorney approached me. He wants to say something to Sarah, Richard said quietly. Just one thing. I looked at Sarah. She nodded slightly. Michael approached, and I noticed his hands were shaking. I'm sorry, he said to Sarah. His voice cracked. I know that's not enough. I know nothing I say will ever be enough, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt the kids. I thought I was protecting my future. I thought I was being smart." "You were being selfish," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "You were thinking only of yourself, and you were willing to destroy your family to get what you wanted." "I know," Michael said. Tears were streaming down his face now. "I know that now. I've lost everything that mattered." "No," Sarah corrected him. "You didn't lose everything. You threw it away. There's a difference." She picked up her briefcase and turned to leave. Then she stopped and looked back at him. "I spent 17 years married to a man I thought I knew. It turns out I never knew you at all. And honestly, I'm grateful for that, because the real you, he's not someone I would ever have wanted to know." With that, Sarah walked out of the courtroom, her head high, her children on either side of her. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Sarah opened her consulting business, Mitchell Financial Forensics. The name was deliberate. She kept her married name specifically so that anyone Googling Michael Mitchell and divorce would find her business. "It's petty," she admitted to me over coffee one day, "but it's also strategic. Every divorcing spouse who thinks their partner is hiding money and searches online for information finds my website. I've gotten 43 clients in 6 months." She'd also started speaking at legal conferences, teaching attorneys how to spot financial fraud in divorce cases. She'd become something of a minor celebrity in family law circles, the forensic accountant who uncovered her own husband's $3.2 million fraud scheme. "How are the kids?" I asked. "Kids. Emma got early admission to Northwestern," Sarah said, her face lighting up. "Full scholarship, actually. She wrote her college essay about financial ethics and the importance of integrity. Her guidance counselor said it was the most powerful essay she'd ever read." "And Jack?" "Jack's doing better. He's in therapy still, working through trust issues. But he's making progress. He started playing basketball again, which is good. He'd stopped doing everything he loved for a while." "Do they see Michael?" Sarah's expression darkened slightly. "Emma doesn't. She hasn't spoken to him since the divorce. Jack sees him occasionally, maybe once every few months. Very supervised, very formal. Michael tries too hard, brings expensive gifts, wants to take Jack to fancy restaurants. Jack just wants his dad to be honest with him." "Will Michael ever get that relationship back?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "He destroyed something fundamental when he lied to them. Trust isn't something you can rebuild with money or apologies. It takes time, and it takes change. Real change. I'm not sure Michael is capable of that." She paused, staring into her coffee. "You know what bothers me most? It's not even the money. If Michael had come to me 5 years ago and said, 'I want a divorce, and here's what I think the fair split should be,' we could have worked it out. It would have been hard, but we could have done it like adults. Instead, he chose to lie and cheat and manipulate. He chose to make me feel crazy for noticing that things didn't add up. He chose to make our children feel poor while hoarding millions. And for what? He would have had plenty of money in a normal divorce. But he wanted more. He wanted to win. And in trying to win, he lost everything that actually mattered." I'd been thinking about this case a lot in the months since it ended, about what drives someone like Michael to commit this kind of fraud, about the warning signs that Sarah noticed and how many other spouses might be missing similar signs in their own marriages. "What would you tell someone who's in the position you were in 2 years ago?" I asked Sarah. "Someone who suspects their spouse is hiding money but doesn't know for sure." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't let anyone make you feel paranoid or crazy for asking questions. Document everything, every odd transaction, every unusual expense, every lie or inconsistency, and find an attorney who will take your concerns seriously." She leaned forward. "But here's the most important thing. Know your worth, financially and otherwise. I spent years thinking I needed Michael because he was the breadwinner. I'd given up my career to raise our kids, and I thought that made me dependent on him. But I wasn't dependent. I was a partner. I contributed immensely to our family and to his success, and I deserved to be treated as an equal partner in every sense. That's powerful advice. It comes from experience, Sarah said with a sad smile. I wish I'd learned it earlier, but better late than never. As for Michael, the aftermath of the divorce was brutal. The State Bar Ethics Committee found him guilty of professional misconduct and suspended his CPA license for 5 years. He could apply for reinstatement after that, but he'd have to demonstrate rehabilitation and ethical fitness. The IRS criminal investigation resulted in charges of tax fraud. Michael eventually pled guilty to reduce the charges and received 2 years of probation, a $250,000 fine, and an order to pay $400,000 in back taxes and penalties. He narrowly avoided prison time by cooperating fully and by the fact that he had no prior criminal record. His accounting firm, Mitchell & Associates, essentially collapsed. Most of his clients left once the news of his fraud became public. The few who stayed were mostly small businesses who couldn't easily switch accountants mid-year. By the end of the year, following the divorce, even they were gone. Michael sold the business name and client list for a fraction of what it had been worth. He took a job as a staff accountant at a mid-sized firm, making $75,000 a year, less than half his former income, and a far cry from the $400,000 he'd been actually earning. After paying child support, $3,500 a month, spousal support, $8,000 per month, his share of the kids' expenses, his probation costs, and his court-ordered therapy, Michael had virtually nothing left. He lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town. He drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic. He brought his lunch to work every day. He was living the life he'd pretended to have for 5 years while stealing from his wife. I ran into him once, about a year after the divorce, at a coffee shop downtown. He was sitting alone at a table, staring at his laptop, looking worn and defeated. "Michael," I said, acknowledging him. He looked up, startled. "Oh, hello." He looked like he wanted to disappear. "How are you doing?" I asked, not unkindly. "Surviving," he said. "That's about all I can say." There was an awkward pause. "I heard about your license suspension," I said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Michael said, his voice hollow. "I earned it. I earned all of this." Another pause. Do you know how Sarah's doing? And the kids?" "They're doing well," I said carefully. "Sarah has a successful consulting business. Emma's at Northwestern. Jack's thriving." Michael's eyes welled up with tears. "Good," he whispered. That's good. I'm glad they're okay. That they're moving on." "They are. You should move on too, Michael." "I can't," he said, looking back at his laptop. "Every day I wake up and realize what I threw away, my family, my career, my reputation, and for what? Money that's gone, money that never made me happy anyway." He looked up at me. "You want to know the worst part? I could have had everything I wanted legally. Sarah would have been fair. We would have split things reasonably, and I would have had plenty, but I got greedy. I got arrogant. I thought I was smarter than everyone else." "What are you doing now?" I asked. "Working, paying my debts, going to court-ordered therapy, where I'm supposed to figure out why I did what I did." He laughed bitterly. "You want to know what my therapist says? She says I have deep-seated insecurity and a pathological need for control. Apparently, I couldn't accept that Sarah might have power in the divorce, so I tried to take all the power by hiding the money. And what do you think? I think I was an idiot. I think I destroyed my life and hurt the people I loved most because I was scared and selfish." He paused. "And I think there's no coming back from what I did. Emma won't even read my texts. Jack barely tolerates seeing me. Sarah looks through me like I'm a ghost." Time helps, I offered. Does it? Michael asked. Because I feel like every day that passes, the weight of what I did gets heavier, not lighter. I didn't have an answer for him. This case taught me lessons I share with every client now, whether they're the betrayed spouse or just someone going through a normal divorce. First, if your spouse is suddenly secretive about money, start asking questions immediately. Financial infidelity usually precedes divorce by years, not months. The sooner you catch it, the easier it is to protect yourself. Second, trust your instincts. Sarah Mitchell knew something was wrong for years before she could prove it. She felt it in her gut. The inconsistencies, the lies, the manipulations. If something feels off, investigate. Third, document everything, every expense, every income source, every suspicious transaction. In forensic accounting, patterns are everything. One odd transaction might be a mistake. 10 odd transactions is a pattern. 100 is proof. Fourth, don't underestimate yourself. Sarah thought she was just a stay-at-home mom, but she was a former forensic accountant with skills that directly applied to her situation. Whatever your background, you have value and capabilities. Use them. Fifth, fraud almost never stays hidden forever. Michael had 5 years of successful deception, but once the pressure of the divorce hit, the whole structure crumbled. Fraudsters are like jugglers. They can keep the balls in the air only as long as no one watches too closely. Sixth, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. If Michael had been honest about his income, he would have paid more in support, sure. But he would have kept his CPA license, his business, his clients, his reputation, and some relationship with his children. His attempt to win the divorce cost him everything that actually mattered. Seventh, greed destroys. Michael didn't need to hide money. He was already wealthy. He had a successful business. He would have been fine financially after a fair divorce. But he wanted more. He wanted it all. And that greed consumed him. And finally, justice, while often slow, is usually inevitable. It took 2 years from the start of Sarah's suspicions to the final settlement. 2 years of stress, investigation, legal battles, and heartache. But in the end, the truth came out. Sarah got what she deserved, and Michael faced consequences for his actions. 3 years after the divorce, I attended Emma Mitchell's college graduation. Sarah had invited me, and I was honored to go. Emma graduated summa cum laude with a degree in economics and a minor in accounting. She'd been accepted to multiple top law schools and had decided on Harvard. I want to be a family law attorney, Emma told me at the graduation reception. I want to help people like my mom, people who are being defrauded by the person they trusted most. Your mom would be proud, I said. She is proud, Emma replied, glancing over at Sarah, who was laughing with Jack and his girlfriend. And I'm proud of her. She could have let what Dad did destroy her. Instead, she built something amazing from it. Your dad asked about you, I said carefully. He's been doing better, apparently. Completed his probation, working on getting his license back. Emma's expression hardened. Good for him. Do you think you'll ever talk to him again? I don't know, Emma said honestly. Part of me wants to forgive him. He's still my dad, you know. But another part of me can't forget watching my mom struggle while he had millions hidden. Can't forget feeling poor and embarrassed when we were actually wealthy. Can't forget that he looked me in the eye and lied over and over again for years. She paused. Maybe someday, but not yet. I'm not ready. That's fair, I said. The weird thing is, Emma continued, in a twisted way, what he did made me who I am. It taught me the importance of integrity. It showed me what happens when you prioritize money over people. It gave me a purpose, helping others who are going through what my mom went through, so maybe some good came from it after all. That's a mature perspective. Yeah, well, Emma said with a slight smile, I had a lot of therapy. We both laughed. 5 years after the divorce, I received an unexpected call. This is Michael Mitchell, the voice on the phone said. I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you, Michael. What can I do for you? I wanted to let you know that I've completed the requirements for reinstatement of my CPA license, but I'm not going to apply. Oh? I don't deserve it, he said simply. I violated the trust that comes with being a CPA. Even if the bar would give me back my license, I can't in good conscience accept it, so I'm formally withdrawing from the profession. What will you do? I've been teaching, Michael said, business ethics at a community college. I teach about fraud, about the consequences of unethical behavior. I tell my students my story, the whole story, as a cautionary tale. How do they react? Some are horrified, some are fascinated, but they all learn. They learn what happens when you prioritize personal gain over doing what's right. They learn that the price of fraud isn't just legal consequences. It's losing the people you love. There was a pause. I also wanted to ask you something. Could you give Sarah a message from me? I can try. What's the message? Tell her I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Not because I want anything from her. I know there's no coming back from what I did, but because she deserves to hear it. She deserves to know that I understand now what I destroyed. And she deserves to know that watching her thrive, building her business, raising our amazing kids, it's the only thing that makes what I did feel slightly less awful. His voice cracked. She's a better person than I ever was. She always was. I just couldn't see it. I'll tell her, I said. Thank you. And thank you for what you did for her. You helped her when she needed it most. I'll always be grateful for that, even though I'm the one you were fighting against. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time thinking about that conversation, about the fact that Michael had finally truly understood what he'd lost, about whether that understanding came too late to matter. I called Sarah that evening and relayed Michael's message. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Thank you for telling me, Sarah finally said. I'm glad he understands. I'm glad he's trying to do something positive. Do you forgive him? Another pause. I don't know, Sarah said honestly. Part of me does. Part of me can see that he's genuinely remorseful and trying to make amends. But another part of me will never forget the years of lies, the years of watching my children suffer while he hoarded money, the betrayal. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, I offered. No, it's not, Sarah agreed. Maybe someday I'll get there, but not yet. For now, I'm focused on moving forward, not looking back. That seems healthy. You know what the best revenge is? Sarah asked, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Living well. My business is thriving. My kids are happy. I'm happy. Michael can apologize all he wants, but the best response to what he did isn't anger or bitterness. It's success. You're a remarkable person, Sarah Mitchell. No, she said softly. I'm just someone who refused to let someone else's bad choices define my life. I'm someone who fought back, and I'm someone who learned that the person I needed to save all along was myself. That, more than anything else, is the lesson of this case. You can't control what others do to you. You can't prevent betrayal or fraud or lies, but you can control how you respond. You can choose to be a victim, or you can choose to fight back. You can let someone's betrayal destroy you, or you can use it as fuel to rebuild yourself stronger. Sarah Mitchell chose strength. She chose justice. She chose herself and her children. And in doing so, she taught me, and hopefully everyone who hears this story, that sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning in court. It's reclaiming your life. It's standing up for yourself when you've been knocked down. It's proving that integrity, truth, and resilience are worth more than all the hidden millions in the world. That's the real $2.7 million secret. Or rather, the $3.2 million lesson. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy back time, trust, or love once they're gone. Michael Mitchell learned that the hard way. The rest of us would do well to learn it from his mistakes. The end. The first thing I did was subpoena Michael's business records. He fought it, of course. His lawyer filed motion after motion trying to delay discovery. That's when I knew Sarah was right. Innocent spouses don't fight this hard to keep their finances hidden. When we finally got the records, it took my forensic accountant 3 weeks to untangle what Michael had done. And I have to admit, it was sophisticated. This wasn't some guy hiding cash in a shoebox. This was calculated, methodical, and it had been going on for almost 5 years. Michael had created a shell company, MW Consulting Services. On paper, it looked legitimate. It had a business license, a tax ID number, even a basic website. But it had no employees, no office, and only one client, Michael's own accounting firm. Here's how the scheme worked. Michael's firm would bill clients the normal rate, let's say $10,000 for a project. But then his firm would turn around and subcontract part of that work to MW Consulting for $7,000. MW Consulting would do absolutely nothing, but it would receive the money. Michael's firm would report the $3,000 difference as its profit, showing modest income. But the $7,000, that went into a separate business account that Sarah knew nothing about. He'd been doing this for 5 years, hundreds of transactions, thousands of dollars at a time, sometimes tens of thousands. My accountant estimated that Michael had siphoned off approximately $2.7 million into accounts Sarah had never seen. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Michael had also been overpaying taxes deliberately. He'd been having his firm withhold extra federal and state taxes, building up huge refunds that he'd been diverting to his secret accounts. Sarah thought they were breaking even or struggling. Michael was quietly becoming wealthy. When we confronted him with our findings during a deposition, I'll never forget the look on his face. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was fury that he'd been caught. "That money is from my business," he said coldly. "It has nothing to do with the marriage." His lawyer tried to argue that the shell company was a legitimate business strategy, that Michael had every right to structure his business however he wanted. They claimed the separate accounts were for business purposes and shouldn't be considered marital assets. But here's what they couldn't explain. Why did Michael need to hide these accounts from his wife? Why did he set up the shell company just 6 months after consulting with a divorce attorney the first time? Yes, we found those records too. Why did he time his actual divorce filing for right after he'd moved another $400,000 into an offshore investment account? The paper trail told the whole story. Michael had been planning his exit for years. He'd been systematically hiding marital assets, preparing for the day he'd leave Sarah with what he thought would be minimal alimony and child support obligations based on his modest visible income. We filed motions to freeze all accounts, including MW Consulting. We demanded an emergency hearing. The judge was not pleased when we laid out the evidence: wire transfers to offshore accounts, shell companies, falsified business expenses. The judge used words like fraud and contempt. Michael's lawyer tried to negotiate. They offered to discover an additional $200,000 in forgotten business assets. I told them to get serious or get ready for a very public trial where Michael's accounting clients might be interested to learn their trusted advisor had been running elaborate financial schemes. Eventually, Michael agreed to a full forensic accounting of all businesses and accounts. The final number came to $2.7 million in hidden assets, plus the marital home, plus his retirement accounts, plus the legitimate business value. Sarah was awarded the house, half of all discovered assets, including the hidden accounts, child support, based on Michael's true income, and substantial alimony. The total settlement exceeded $2 million. The judge also ordered Michael to pay Sarah's legal fees, which, after 18 months of litigation and forensic accounting, were considerable. But here's what struck me most about this case. The kids. Sarah and Michael's children were 14 and 16 when this started. By the time it ended, they'd learned that their father had spent 5 years lying, scheming, and preparing to financially devastate their mother. The older one, their daughter, stopped speaking to Michael entirely. The son went to therapy. Michael got his divorce. He also got a reputation in the community as someone who'd defraud his own family. Several clients left his firm when word got out about the shell company scheme. The business he'd worked so hard to hide money from ended up losing value because of the scandal. Sarah once told me during a follow-up meeting, "I knew something was wrong. I felt it for years. I just couldn't prove it. Thank God I trusted my instincts." This case taught me several lessons I share with every client now. First, if your spouse is suddenly concerned about money despite no obvious financial problems, start asking questions. If someone who's never worried about grocery bills suddenly wants receipts for everything, something has changed. Second, in a marriage, financial secrecy is often financial infidelity. Spouses don't hide accounts from each other unless they're planning to use that information asymmetry to their advantage. Third, the cover-up is often worse than the crime. If Michael had been honest about the money from the start, he probably would have kept more of it in the divorce. Instead, his attempt to defraud Sarah cost him hundreds of thousands in legal fees, sanctions, and punitive calculations in the settlement. And finally, sophisticated schemes can be uncovered. Michael thought he was smarter than everyone else. He thought his accounting knowledge made him untouchable. But forensic accountants have seen every trick in the book, and judges have zero tolerance for spouses who hide assets from the court. Sarah moved on. Last I heard, she'd gone back to school and was pursuing her own career. Her kids were doing better, though the relationship with their father remained strained. She'd started dating someone new, someone who, she told me with a smile, believed in joint bank accounts and complete transparency. Michael? He's still practicing accounting, though his firm is much smaller now. He pays his child support on time. The court made sure of that with automatic wage garnishment. And that $2.7 million he'd worked so hard to hide, most of it ended up going exactly where it should have in the first place, supporting his family. The moral of the story isn't complicated. Honesty isn't just the best policy in marriage. Sometimes it's the most profitable one too.